The guy says, that's once. Hits the mule with a stick. Mule starts moving up faster. And then the mule stops. That's twice. So he hits the mule with a stick. Mule starts going faster. Mule stops. Guy goes to the back of the cart, pulls out his shotgun, shoots the mule. Mule just falls over dead. The wife says, "What are you doing? You just killed our mule." He says, "That's once." I had this is no time to explain those jokes. I had a Latin teacher in high school. About this tall. His name was Mr. Nuccio. Now, one of the reasons that I remember Mr. Nuccio was not only just because he was short, but he was a real whippersnapper. He was a tough guy. And boy, you better not give him any hard time. And one of the things that I did, and I'm sure none of you have ever done this, so don't take any advice. For a while, I decided to hide out in the press room. I worked in the press room with the school newspaper sometimes. And so I could sit at a desk, and they figure I was working at the newspaper, and then I could skip Latin, because I had trouble with Latin. It was like Greek to me. No, that's not right. But anyway, I hid out from Mr. Nuccio and his class, and I'd been doing it about 10 days in a row. Nobody said a word. I thought, boy, I got a scam here. And then one day Mr. Nuccio walks by. He says, "Hi," as he walked by, and I said, "Hi." The next day, Mr. Nuccio walked by and said, "I'll just say hi again, and he'll just pass me back." But he didn't pass me up this time. He turned right into the office and stood at my desk, and he said, "Aren't you supposed to be in my Latin class?" That's just how he said it. "Yes, sir, I am." "What are you doing up here?" "Well, sir, the reason I was up here," and I started to come up with some kind of crazy cockamamie scheme, and Mr. Nuccio went like this: "Babble, babble, babble. You get in my class." I got in his class. And then, every now and then, I learned not to miss his class after that, because suddenly, without warning, in the middle of a lecture, he'd turn around and hit me in the head with an eraser. Whack! Dead on, right in front of me. Bam! I never expected it, but he was good. He didn't mind being short because he could handle himself. And then, when the class would get noisy, he would say, "Knock off the noise, babble, babble, babble." Well, that made a little bit of an impact on me, but one night Dad was going to go with me to school to meet my teachers. You've had that night, haven't you? Yeah. So I said to Dad, "Listen, one of the teachers I got to introduce you to is one that's kind of mad at me because I was skipping class, by Mr. Nuccio. He's my Latin teacher. And Dad, if you talk to him too much, he's going to look at you and he's going to say, 'Babble, babble, babble.' So don't talk to him too much, okay, so we can get out of there quick?" Well, Dad didn't want to have anybody do that to him, so we got out of there pretty quick. And then I decided I'm going to look up the word babble, because I was sitting in my Friday night Bible study. I was only 15 at that time. I hadn't yet received Christ in my heart, but I was at the Awana meeting. And as they were having their Bible study, they talked about the Tower of Babel. And when he said the Tower of Babel, I was scared to death he was going to like this. But he didn't. He just said and told the story of the Tower of Babel. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with it or not. Let me tell it to you real quick. Noah had the flood. Everybody is wiped out, except Noah's family. Noah's family found grace in the eyes of the Lord. Although Noah was not more righteous than the rest, at least he listened to God, and he found grace in God's eyes, and God saved his family. 100 years after the flood, the people of Nimrod was their king, decided to build a building. They said, listen, we're replenishing the generations now. There were a lot more than just Noah's family now that had multiplied. Now, it couldn't have been a terribly, terribly lot, but I'm sure that it was a big city. It was a large city, and they said, among other cities that had evidently been dispersed, but they were the big city, and they got together and said, I'll tell you what we'll do. Let's build a building that everybody will love, and they'll all come to see it. Everybody will come to our city to see this building. Now, I say everybody because everybody was in the city. I mean, these are where the people conglomerated for the most part. Now, the Bible tells the story about these people saying they want to be famous. And the funny thing is, there couldn't have been that many people. They would be famous anyway. It'd be like something you did. Most of the school knows what you've done. So being famous was not a big deal. But they wanted to be famous. And King Nimrod, who had probably named himself a king and was one of the biggest men and toughest and had a group around him to protect him, decided to name himself king and make himself in charge of this city. So now they start to make a building. They start to develop it. Now, according to the archaeological structures, they suggest strongly that there is a layer that is made for marketing, for stores, for people to come and see it. And then there are 8 layers. And this building is about 600 feet. Now, 600 feet back in those days is quite a size because they only have the very rough tools to put together. Although their tools were efficient, the Egyptians already had some tremendous tools. And so it was that the world is replenishing, and they're making this giant tower. Now, first of all, let me tell you that the study tells me in reference that there were people that could afford the towers in order to live. In other words, they lived in condominiums. One of these 8 floors, they lived in very nice condominiums with probably the king living at the top. And they were making the largest construction that they could so that everybody would say that Nimrod and his city of Sidon were famous. Now that's a little bit of the story. Somewhere in the midst of this story, the people became very belligerent. Probably following the leadership of the king, Nimrod had made the top floor of this giant tower to worship other gods. Now here God had just destroyed the world by flooding. He had just replenished it by letting Noah replenish the world. And now the world that exists is already insulting God and saying, we want to worship other gods. I don't know how he puts up with this. Now in the scriptures, it suggests that God took a tour of the city. Now how did he do that? He probably did that through Jesus. Jesus, the Holy Spirit, and God took a tour through the city, and they took a look especially at the towers that were being built. And when they looked at this tower, God says, if these people can make this exciting a city with the tools that they've got, and they can blaspheme God, there's no telling what they can do. In other words, God is already warning himself about what you and I are like. Why do we do that? Why are we so quick to fight against God and to build these things that God doesn't like, or to make these talents go against the God that made us and wants to love us? Because of our pride. There's something in us that says we want to be bigger than God. Let me read to you the story. Now the whole earth had one language and one speech. It came to pass, as they journeyed from the east, that they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they dwelt there. Then they said one to another, "Come, let us make bricks and bake them thoroughly." They had brick for stone, and they had asphalt for mortar. And they said, "Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower whose top is in the heavens. Let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth." But the Lord came down to see the city, and this is when I say he toured it, and the tower which the sons of men had built. And the Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one, and they all have one language, and this is what they begin to do with nothing. Nothing that they prepare to do will be withheld from them. Come, let us go down and therefore confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the earth, and they ceased building the city. Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth. It's the Bible story of where your peoples come from. Babel means confusion. And God made very clearly that he was not the author of confusion. So these people are building this tower so tall that they want it to go into heaven, and now they're going to have a big celebration. And they decide to all gather together, and they're playing the harps and the instruments and the drums, and they're dancing, and who knows what else they're doing. And they're up at the top of this tower, and Nimrod takes a magnificent golden bow, an arrow, and he looks at it and says, "Okay, God, you take this. We'll show them who God is." And he pulls it back, and he lets it go and laughs right into the clouds. I guess thinking he was going to kill God. So God, Mr. Nushio, looks at this arrow coming at him and said, "That's it." Opened his hand, and every one of them had a different language. And all of a sudden that tower started to fall. And God said, "Never again." Now here's the interesting point I want to make. I do this by conjecture, only by research and study of God's personality. He could have destroyed all of us. He could have said, "I've had it. I did the flood. I'm going to destroy him." But he didn't. He destroyed the tower, and he sent the people out in different languages so that everybody could find somebody's language, could get with them, and that's how people got together. I can understand what you're saying. I can live with you. And that's how the peoples came to be, and the different peoples scattered into the earth. But by the experience of God's amazing grace, that finger could have done anything. All of a sudden, I see Mr. Nushio going, "Bulbul, babble, babble." And I suddenly know that my Latin grade is at stake. Not a big deal, but back then Latin grade was a big stake for me. It was important for my high school diploma. And now God looks at the Tower of Babel and destroys it. Let me give you a little advice. Every one of you is like the Tower of Babel. You are magnificent. You are one of the biggest things that exist. No, you are the biggest thing that exists. When God made you, he made something so magnificent that there is nothing on earth that matches you. These people wanted to be famous, so they built a tower and thought they could be proud of it, and they had Nimrod, their king, go up there and shoot an arrow at God. I guess you can do anything you want to with a tower until you face the force that won't be moved. Each one of you are building a tower, and it's magnificent. Every one of you have your own fingerprint. Every one of you have your own DNA. Nobody else has your DNA, and therefore you are by yourself unique. You are an amazing tower to yourself. You are worth more than the whole world. Jesus said, what will it profit you if you gain the whole world and suffer the loss of your own soul? It won't profit you. You are worth more than value of the whole world. The experience of who you are and understanding who you are, and that you're building a tower. Right now you are building that tower. And maybe you don't think about it every day, but you ought to. You ought to realize that you are building a tower of your life, and your tower is going to be seen by the world, and people are going to talk about you, whoever you are. And they're going to examine what kind of tower you are and what kind of help in the desert you are. Each of you have condominiums. Each of you have places where things sit and live. You have boxes where you do things and you understand things. You've got talents that God has given you, where you are the most magnificent of any kind of tower that exists. But you know what? If you're like most people, it's Babel, Babel, Babel. Doesn't mean a thing. Babel, Babel. Your life means nothing. Your life is confused. So how do you find purpose? How do you understand where you're going? They didn't know where they were going. They built a 600-foot building that they thought was magnificent, and they thought they were going to get to heaven that way. How stupid can you be? And every one of you is just as stupid. I'm as stupid. I thought that I could build. I thought that I could make myself what I wanted to be until I encountered that force that I can't change. The force of God and His love and His power over me. I can't change that, and I can't make my life better no matter how much I think. And there are people out there who think they can make their life better than what God can do. Enter ye in at the strait gate, for wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. And narrow is the gate that leads to life, and few there be that find it. You're building a tower right now. Is it a Tower of Babel? Or does it make sense? How do you find the way? You turn to God. You have a purpose. Jesus said, when the disciples didn't know where they were going, He sat down with them and said, I'm going to prepare a place for you. And if I go to prepare a place for you, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you will be also. And where I'm going, you know, and the way you know. Thomas said, Lord, we don't know where you're going. How can we possibly know the way? Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No man comes to the Father but by me. What do you have to offer in your tower? I climb your tower, what do I see? If I sit down with you and go where you're going, do I understand your road? Do I know where you're going? Do you have something worth giving to somebody else? Are you wasting time creating Babel? You've got to have a vision. You've got to read your talents. You've got to know what you're trying to accomplish. You've got to understand that God has put together a destination where you can change the world. And you are in here where you will change the world. Some of you can change the world and make it peaceable. Some of you can bring people to heaven. Some of you can save people from hell. Some of you will change worlds and help people to eat, help people to be clothed, help people to help people. Some of you, like you're doing now, will waste your time without a vision. Jesus wants to build you as a tower. You are the most magnificent tower that exists. What kind of tower are you? Babel? Or are you the way? May God grant you to not be the Tower of Babel, to not have God point His finger at you and destroy you. God grant that you be a tower of the way, and let Jesus guide you. Give Him the chance to give you the message that will save the world.